Where were you on the spectrum of, were you miserable? Was it like, okay?
No, I wasn't. I was happy. I felt like for a long time I felt like what I was doing was making a difference. And I guess we're in the generation where it's uncommon to have someone go for the gold watch in 30 years. So I never really considered that something I would do forever.
All right, welcome to another episode of Made to Matter. I am your host and founder, I'm Landrum, and this is the show where we help men in their second half of life discover their purpose, pursue their life's work so they can live with more clarity, freedom, and fulfillment. Today, I'm excited to have a guest on the show. This guest and I go back, Shannon, you won't believe this. I think it's 30 years.
It's crazy.
It's 30 years. We went to college together at Clemson University, and I have a lot of stories. We both have blackmail stories for each other that are checkmate. We can't tell anyone because we just burned the other one down. I'm half joking, only half joking. But anyway, Shannon Harvey, so glad to have you on the show. And I'm going to turn it over to you for you to do a quick introduction, if you would.
Sure. Adam, thanks for having me on. I guess my story is that I worked for 20 plus years in the financial services, owned my own business for a dozen years. And then I guess the pandemic caused a lot of people to reconsider what they were doing and to take a look at how they were spending their time. And when we're at work, we are spending our time greatly. So I was losing a key employee who my wife jokingly referred to as my work wife. And this lady and I had worked together for 8 years, and she was like my right hand person. And her husband was displaced, ended up taking a job in Virginia, and I knew that she would soon follow, contrary to her telling me they were going to do the commute thing. I knew Virginia wasn't a really good commute. And it just occurred to me one day that when I was going to lose her, I was really going to lose a lot of the joy in doing my job. And I didn't feel like I was contributing a whole lot in that regard. So I started thinking about things. I mentioned to my wife the thoughts I was entertaining. And she told me, she said, well, let's do it the old fashioned way where you take a couple of personality tests, find out what your wheelhouse might be, and pursue whatever comes up. And for me, 5 of the 6 things that came up were education related, teaching related. And I decided to just take a leap of faith and consider that, God or the universe or whatever your faith might call our creator was telling me to do. And I jumped in with both feet, and I have for the past 3 years been teaching middle school math and really enjoying it. Feeling like I'm giving back and contributing, and it doesn't feel like work.
So you had an Allstate Insurance
I did.
company, right? Okay. And then did you end up selling that, or did you have
I did. So as soon as I made up my mind, I pursued the sales process, found a buyer, and I really felt like that all worked out way easier than it should have, considering the circumstances. And again, it was just kind of affirming that I was going down the right path.
Okay, cool. So we have a lot to unpack in your intro. So it's COVID. You lose your right hand person who you really enjoyed working with. It sounded like. It makes me think of, what's that stat that like people don't quit companies, they quit bosses. And you almost had it in reverse. It's like people don't keep businesses until they lose their favorite employee. Then they're like, I'm out of here. It's gonna be too hard to replace that. So also pretty smart. You saw through the, I hear you're not gonna commute. let's get real. All right. So now, and your wife was integral in this. She sounds like she's a very smart, wise lady, and that you actually you listen to her. So
It's
That's
just that easy and just that hard, right?
uh, well, so that's really cool. So what were the assessments that you took? Do you remember?
I can't recall the company's name, but there were a couple of well-known ones, and we had some friends who work in the, I guess, HR recruiting, and they came recommended. So I went down that path, answered sometimes you can try to either outsmart yourself or try to figure out what the question would answer the question's looking for, and I didn't do any of that. And you have to kind of put your ego aside a little bit with some of those questions, because if you're going to be honest, you're going to show your strengths and your weaknesses. And I did that. I answered everything honestly, and didn't try to gamify the outcome. And when you mentioned my wife, when the answers came back, and I told her, the next thing she says, I don't know how many, I've been telling you for years you want to get into teaching, which I think was the first time I heard her say that. And I don't think she was being dishonest, but I didn't remember her. I never remembered those conversations having come up. I guess she kind of knew it apparently. And thinking back to, my previous life, I guess going all the way back to high school, I remember even in middle school, teaching appealed to me. And I guess I was considering pursuing studying that at Clemson. And then a friend whose mother is a teacher, was a career teacher, the answer she gave me kind of discouraged me. And I think she was coming at it from a good place, where you lead with the drawbacks. Of course, no one ever gets into teaching for the fame or the fortune. So she led with everything income related.
Yeah. Okay.
And had I never solicited her advice, I may have gone that direction to begin with. And you never know why things work out the way they do. But it made it easy for me to say yes and to take that leap of faith because I had considered it previously.
Yeah. Oh, so your major at Clemson, you were already in education at one point.
Well, no, I was in business, but before going into my freshman year, that was on the table.
Yeah. Okay. So, rolling back just real quick to the insurance business, where were you on the spectrum of, were you miserable? Was it like, okay?
No, I wasn't. I was happy. I felt like, for a long time, I felt like what I was doing was making a difference. And, I guess we're in the generation where it's uncommon to have someone go for the gold watch in 30 years. So I never really considered that something I would do forever. But I know part of me getting into being an agent and an agency owner was that I thought, well, hey, this might be something that one of the kids might want to do, and they could take it over. And I think that's probably common with someone who owns a business. And then throughout the years, it became obvious that my son and daughter had no interest in it.
Okay.
And so that probably had a little bit to do, or a lot to do with the decision. But no, I wasn't miserable. I just knew that in that business, you have to always be hiring, or at least always be looking to hire, because you never know when you're going to lose an employee. And all of my employees were valuable and made a difference over the years. But of course, there's a few that really stand out, and key employees. And Wendy, the one I mentioned earlier, my right-hand person, she was not only a key employee. I mean, she was like part of the family, and her family was as well. And I think that kind of that hits differently.
Yeah. Well, I think you made a smart move. I lost, I think 19 years into 22 years, I lost a key employee, actually a couple of key employees, and I chose to stay and rebuild. It's the hardest years of my life.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, it was very, very tough. So I think it was a wise choice that you made, and especially going to something that you really thought that you would enjoy. So when you got the results back, you weren't shocked. Your wife wasn't shocked. She's already been telling you that for many years. My wife too. She said, "Adam, you've been saying this all along." I'm like, why don't I remember this? But
listening, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what did you have any, when that came back, were there any trepidations about that? Like, were you like, darn it, or were you excited, or what was the response?
No, I guess there was some excitement, also a little bit of shock because uh, that wasn't on my radar at all.
Hmm.
Uh, but I remember I reached out to a couple of my good friends who you would know that I see frequently, and and I mentioned it to one. And he's the guy that I think this is one of your old roommates. He's the guy you would seek advice from.
Okay.
Very level-headed.
We can say his name.
Okay, so
Is this you?
this is Matt.
Okay.
I reached out to Matt, and he's very unemotional about decisions for the most part.
He's a
And
robot, pretty much, Matt. This Matt guy.
yeah, so I remember telling him, he just happened to be on the phone with me about football tickets or something, and I just decided I was like, "All right, let me just throw it out there," and I mentioned it to him, and I remember him saying, "God, I'm a little jealous." I've always wanted to do that, and I'm like,
Well,
"What?" And he's like, "Yeah, that's like maybe one of my little dreams is after the kids are out of college or whatever, once I retire, going back and teaching and maybe even coaching track or football or something." And he had a whole thought process about it, and I guess I was just wanting to gauge. I was wanting maybe someone to tell me, "Well, you're crazy. You should not do. That's a bad idea." And I had the opposite reaction from him, and a couple of others. Another guy who, when we were in school, he was probably a senior when when I was a freshman, and he was a tough nut. I mean, real hardcore, and guys kind of steered away from this dude. He became a teacher, and I remember that because he would come back and do the golf tournament every now and again. And I called him, and it was so funny. He'd been pleasant and kind and everything in our adult years, contrary to when we were in college. But I remember him just being so willing to help. You could tell every email response. He had paragraphs. You could tell he put a lot of thought to it. Was very helpful, and he talked about something that struck a chord with me about being able to spend more time with his sons.
hmm.
And that was another reason that we thought this was a good pursuit, because our kids were getting into the high. One was about to come out of middle school, and we were like, it'd be neat to have the same schedule with them, where you're not going to
Yeah.
miss some of the events. And it just everything just kind of affirmed the check mark that I was going in the right direction. It felt like it was out of my control for a good reason, and I decided just to be passive, not fight back, and see what was going to happen.
All right, you're winning all sorts of awards. You listen to your wife. And then two, and then two, you went and sought counsel, and it sounds like you got a great affirmation. Did you have any of the naysayers, like the teacher in high school who told you, yeah, you don't want to do this?
Well, no, I had some of the usual comments from guys you might hang out with in the neighborhood, or occasionally go grab a drink or play golf with. Just say like, that just doesn't appeal to me. They would arrest me for having a strangle a kid, those kind of things. But
Yeah.
but these are guys that you never, and some gals, of course, not just a guy thing, but these were people who you never would in your mind think would belong in a classroom. We probably know a lot of people where if you mention, could you see them being a teacher? And you're like, oh, so I could see them being great at that. In fact, I never thought about it. That would be natural for their personality. But these were comments coming from people where you would always be like, that's the last person that I could see in a classroom. They would be miserable. It would be a miserable experience for all 30 kids sitting in this desk, things like that.
So it made sense what they're saying too.
Right.
So, okay. And then, so what was the process? Like, you're a business owner, insurance agent, and now midlife, you're making this transition to teacher. Did you have to go back to school, or?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I reached out. I have some family members who are teachers, cousins, both of my sisters-in-law. So I started reaching out to people who were teaching, and I made a very valuable call to a cousin who I'm close with, and she had been teaching in Greenville for close to 20 years. And the first thing she said was, sign up to become a substitute teacher. There's a huge need for it. And you will know immediately when you go into a classroom as a sub, if that's something you're going to love, hate, be able to bare, and there's a huge need for it. So I did that. And then she also gave me some advice on, the alternate path. If you didn't study, if you weren't education, that wasn't your major, you weren't coming out of that background, you can take the alternate path to get an alternate teaching certificate. And there's a handful of programs around the country you apply for. And if you're approved, you go into their process of getting into the classroom as a teacher. So I applied to Teachers of Tomorrow, and once you're approved, they tell you what avenues you could teach based on, they look at your they look at your background. They order what's the thing you call, you get your grades and everything from Clemson.
Transcript.
They order your transcript. They see what your study was and what matches up, and there might be some overlay where a lot of your major touches in the education requirements. And so mine came back where I could do middle school or high school math or business. And then you just have to go through their program. I think it's a couple hundred hours online at your own pace before you go into the classroom.
Okay.
And once you're in the classroom, you have to do the same thing on the backside. But in the beginning, you're learning what it's like to teach, a lot of the philosophies and things that you otherwise would have learned as you studied education.
All right. What was the name of that program again?
Teachers of Tomorrow.
Teachers of Tomorrow. Okay.
Yeah.
So
I'm pretty sure it's started in Texas, and then it spread to several other states. South Carolina is one of their states.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. So did you do the substitution route?
I did. And that's really good advice for a couple of reasons. Because you do get a taste of how you're going to be completely mistreated as a teacher, because you go into I did middle schools. I think I might have done one high school, but you apply through Greenville County. They do your background checks and everything, and then once you're approved, you're in the substitute pool, and you can go online and use your phone and say, I'm willing to substitute in this radius around my house. That's what I did, maybe 5 miles or 10 miles, and then the phone starts ringing off the hook. Because one, Greenville County is
They're like, sucker.
It's a huge school district, so there's a lot of teachers, and of course there's a lot of needs for a substitute. My phone might have buzzed, 16 or 17 times a day on average.
And this is COVID too, right?
Let's see, this is COVID, because they were all doing the masks. You would go into the classroom, they had the partition set up.
And you had teachers, if I remember correctly, they're quitting left and right, aren't they, during COVID?
They were losing teachers from the workforce more so than in the past. And it was a unique experience. But I guess when I first started doing the substitute thing, maybe I guess they had not released kids because there was a time there where everyone went virtual, so it wasn't that time.
Okay,
it was before everyone went.
Okay, got it. All right, so that's good advice. It's a little bit like you saw substitute, start seeing the bottom of what teaching is, and if you like that, then
it's only going to be better, right?
So you're only going up.
Go into a classroom, they might tell you to do 1 or 2 or 3 simple things to keep the kids occupied, and of course you go in there with no authority. You don't even know their names, and even if it's 6th and 7th graders, they know that they have you at a disadvantage if you don't know the names. There's blood in the water, so to speak. So.
Oh man,
it's a unique experience.
All right. At any point did you get into this and go, "What am I doing?"
Yeah, you do have those notions, because I guess you always have a little bit of self-doubt. You're like, "Can I do this?" Because I've never been in a room with 25 to 30 teenagers staring back at me, and I'm trying to get them to just stay in their seats or stop talking, much less deliver a lesson. In the very beginning, you certainly have those doubts. You also you ask yourself multiple times if you're crazy. And I guess the answer is we're all crazy. Maybe I'm just not as crazy as I could be, right?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, so there are those moments, but I had gone into this telling myself, maybe for the first time in my life, I'm not going to try to manipulate it, and I'm not going to. If it's telling me to do A instead of B, I'm going to do A. I'm not going to think I know to do B and I'm smart.
Yeah.
So I just decided to have faith and listen, and I think that really served me well, because there's a few of those moments where you're like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to listen to what they're telling me to do, and it pays off.
So I imagine this was short. Maybe I'm wrong, but how long did it take to go from substitute teacher to full-time teacher?
It really didn't take long. I guess with Teachers of Tomorrow, that pool is a desirable pool where schools are looking to see who's in there to fill a seat if they need a teacher. And there's some teacher turnover. I received a call pretty early on. I thought this was another sign. It was a guy who came. He had spoken at our Rotary Club years ago, and he was in administration for a local charter school. And he called out of the blue, and I said, whatever comes my way, I'm gonna take it, and I'm gonna get into the classroom as quickly as I can. Even though I could have hung around and helped the fellow who bought my business, I decided I didn't want to. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to teach as early as I could, so I jumped in with both feet. I think I was in a classroom September of, what would that have been, 22, I guess. Yes, that's right. So
Okay.
September 22. So I went into a classroom to take over for a science teacher who decided teaching was not for her.
Okay.
And she was military, former military. So I saw it going in. I'm like, well, I'm going to find out real quick what I'm made of, because if it was tough for her, it's going to be tough for a guy who's talking quietly about insurance most of the time.
And how did that play out? Are you still there? Are you still teaching science? Or?
No, I went into the science classroom and they learned that I was in the math lane. So that first semester I filled her gap, and then they moved me into a math classroom after the holidays.
Oh, cool.
It worked well. I went into a school where it was very different. It was a Title I school, and I was really the minority. So if you look at the students I had, I might have been facing the demographics of like 10 to 20% of my students were Caucasian, maybe 30% of the students were Hispanic, and the other 50%, I'll say African American, but that's not really accurate because I had some students who were from other countries.
Yeah.
A lot of students from other countries.
Yeah. So wow. So there's a cultural difference.
Very different.
At the same time, yeah.
Yeah, but I felt like that was a calling because they were really big on the Clemson's Call Me Mr. program. I don't know if you remember that.
Well, do you want to tell our audience, just give that a quick overview?
Sure. So this goes back to probably when we were in college. A former Clemson football player, and now I think he's still involved with the Hall of Famer and everything. Jeff Davis, he played on the national championship team back in 1981. He was the star linebacker on that team, and he wanted to do something to help get more African American males into the classroom because he felt like there weren't enough leadership roles in the schools held by Black males. And he felt like, especially from demographics that he visited and maybe even grew up in, that was important and it was missing. And so I went into a school where it was not uncommon to have men teachers. I mean, there were a lot of men teachers, a few who went to Clemson, others who went to other schools around the state, and they all came through that Call Me Mr. program. And I learned so much from those guys, and I felt like they really were on an elevated platform because they were not just coming at it from how do I deliver a lesson in the class. They were coming at it from the angle of how can I grab a kid and make a difference in his life. And I remember one of my first few days in the classroom, I was having trouble with one kid. I mean, he was hyperactive, couldn't stay in his seat. He's causing trouble with some of the other boys in class. And I remember just coming at break, I was shaking my head, and the fellow across the hall from me, he was teaching English, ELA, and he was a Call Me Mr. teacher. And I'm like, how do I was talking about how do I solve my problem? And he immediately was like, whenever I have a situation like that, I want to find out what's going on with this kid. And you could tell that he came at it from a totally different angle than I was thinking. I was just thinking of solving what might be a classroom management problem. And he was immediately thinking, how can I find out a way to mentor this boy and find out the way that I can make a big difference. So that was
Hmm.
a great experience my first year teaching.
Yeah, that sounds good. I would imagine it's like you don't know what the home life is like. You don't know how many hours of sleep he got, if he even had breakfast
Right.
or dinner for the yeah. Huh. That's amazing. So did you do anything is it Teachers for Tomorrow? Teachers for Did you do anything outside of that, or did you just do that program and then was there a certification or?
Yeah, well, so that's the main program I use. But of course, once you're in the classroom, and the school always has professional development. So you're going into I was going into an environment where it was way different than the business world that I was used to, where almost my entire career it's tied to sales. And so if you have someone that they have something working for them, they might not share what's working for them unless you're a certain distance from where they are, right? Because you could be their competition even though you're both working for the same company.
Yeah.
So there's a little adversarial uh, culture that goes with the business world in that regard versus coming into the classroom. Everyone's a giver,
Yeah.
and it was a real shock to me to see how many people were interested in seeing me succeed, not necessarily because I was going to succeed, but because it is going to help the students that they're also going to be teaching at some point during the day. They're going to succeed. So it's like our current principal uses the phrase "power of our" OUR.
Hmm.
At my first school, the principal had the same kind of mindset where she would often say, "It's a world of difference when you start talking about this kid or that kid instead of talking about our kid." And that was I guess that was a big shock for me that you walk into a situation where you're going to have so much help and professional development because we're all focused on the kids succeeding. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. So a lot of people when they make that I work with, when they're making such a radical transition, that seems like a pretty radical transition. Um, especially if they're hopefully they're going to something that they love, right? And they feel that they're going to
Mhm.
be good at. Um, but then there's always a concern about the financial aspect and it being financially viable for them to go do it. And I think that's what keeps a lot of people from ultimately making this choice. So how did finances factor into this, and what did you end up doing with that, or how'd you reconcile that?
Yeah, so that is a big situation with teaching because I guess in Greenville County they pride themselves on paying teachers more than anywhere in the state. That might have just changed with the bill that passed, and Charleston might have edged past us, but um, it, it's a different animal when it comes to that side of the job, and I couldn't have done it without support of my wife because she gave me the green light in the beginning. She said, "Well, find out what's going to work, and we'll make it work."
Hmm.
And fortunately, I had the situation with my business where it's not like I sold it and I no longer have any kind of revenue stream or anything. So that made it a little easier for me to take the leap of faith. But also just having her support, knowing that, hey, if this messes up, we're going to have to go back and do something different, maybe give it 6 months to 18 months. It was not a situation like that. We both were all in and making it work and, and adjusting to I guess the new environment when it comes to what the income is and everything. But
Yeah.
fortunately, I guess the upside of this is where the later side of my career, where it's different than me going into doing something when the kids are very little,
Hmm.
um, or we don't have any of our uh, finances in order. So that was a luxury that I'm thankful for.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
it gave you choices. It gave you
yeah,
options, right? Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And then, so I think I know the answer to this, but in hindsight, you think it was the right call?
Yeah, it was absolutely the right call. Um, it's the right call when you find yourself thinking, well, what if I had done this earlier? And if you made the right call, you're never asking yourself that. And that comes up occasionally where I find my mind drift to, but should it have happened in my life sooner? But
Hmm.
so many things change, and that's not the way the game works.
Yeah.
But I think for me, it happened at the right time and in my life, and it gave me something to look forward to. You asked if earlier if there was something that made me have second thoughts early on. So I'll tell you a couple of quick things. One is when you go into a classroom with a bunch of middle schoolers, there's a buzz in your head because they're so loud. And in the office environment, you're not accustomed to, not being able to think clearly and having so much. It's like you're in a rock concert sometimes, and you got to get the class back
You
under
got to
control.
work.
Yeah, so I remember very early, maybe 2 weeks into my change. I remember thinking, man, am I sending myself to an early grave because this is stressful right now? And long story short, you adjust to it; it becomes way less stressful. But being someone from the insurance industry, I started looking into actuarial charts, finding out, hey, am I shortening my lifespan? And the funny thing is, with teaching, it's just the opposite. You actually lengthen your lifespan, usually on average 7 to 8 years,
Really?
whether you're a man or a woman. And I thought that was odd, and I've since asked a handful of teachers about it, and they all have different reasons why that might be the case. But one, you're always around younger people who are making you learn new things.
Yeah.
Two, you're always thinking. You're thinking ahead because the guy or the girl who's always talking to their buddies, and you're trying to figure out how you can best seat them in your class. You're always thinking of classroom management techniques to head off a problem before it occurs. And then another teacher also said it's probably our immune system because we're around all this junk every day that we go to school. So who knows? But that was an early consideration I had. But thankfully, the stress changes, and I got the answers I was looking for.
Yeah, that's amazing. I've never heard that stat of the 7 to 8 years. So yeah, hey, everybody, listen to that. If you're thinking, I imagine there are a lot of people who are listening who either want to go teach like you are, high school, middle school, and a lot of people I talk to, of course, they want to be a professor, like even an adjunct professor.
Mm-hmm.
So teaching is such a desire and such a great way to give back. And the other thing, Shannon, I noted is that and I've seen this too, is that you can have regret. There are lots of forms of regrets, but the two forms of regret, and it's the main regret is you're on your deathbed and you're like, I didn't do what I wanted to do. That's the awful regret. You don't want that. The good regret is the one that says, gosh, I wish I would have done this earlier, right? And that's it's like it's a good problem to have. In a way. So here's some of my takeaways from your story, and I think it is an amazing story. I commend you for what you've done. But I hope people sort of picked up on this, and I think they'll have their own takeaways. But the first thing is I'm blown away about how much advice that you got. Throughout the decision. Like, again, we're joking, but your wife was instrumental. Friends and acquaintances were instrumental. Even the teacher that, across the way of, hey, here's how you do it. So you were constantly open to advice. And would you say that's right, that was a major influence for you to make this decision?
Oh, absolutely. I didn't have someone tell me you're crazy, which is the one thing I was looking for.
Yeah.
And I had so much help from different directions, and so many. I guess I hadn't thought about it very much beforehand, but so many people just thought so highly of the occupation, and that's another thing that I think it's easy for us to lose track of is, what are people thinking about what you're doing with your time? And I hadn't given that a whole lot of thought in the past, but obviously this is something that I had never considered, and it's easy for me now to look back and say the advice I received, it was not only valuable advice to help me make a decision, but it was also reassuring in the fact that people were telling me, that's something that the world needs. and
Mm.
I wanted to do something that felt worthwhile. And I guess I would be remiss if I didn't mention I had listened or I had watched a TED talk, and it was instrumental in me making a decision to pursue this. But it was what's her name? I think her last name is Kellaway, Kellaway. She did a TED talk for the London School of Business, and she left journalism at age 58 to go teach.
Hmm.
And she also became a math teacher. And it might have been 11 or 12 minutes, but I remember, the devices are always listening. Whatever was going on at that time, it pushed that video into my feed, and I watched it one day. And she made a great case for how teachers are needed. If you're willing to teach math, and I'm kind of nerdy, I enjoy doing that. You're extra needed. And another thing she said was if you're a man. So it was also kind of the call me Mr. angle of there need to be more men in the classroom. And she was also, I think she started a nonprofit in England to try to put, I think it was 100 teachers later in their life in the classroom, because it's one thing to come in out of school when you might not be married, might not have children, versus at my stage of life, I was coming in with a lot of life experience,
Mm-hmm.
and that goes a long way. And she made the case for that, and it tied into what some of the teachers I was, whose advice I was seeking were saying to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm just saying I think it's amazing that came in your feed. Like you said, the devices are listening, and just at 58 years old, you can reinvent yourself. Like it's not too late. A couple other things I noted, it's just the support that you had, again, not only from your wife and her income, but just from other people, from the teacher who sends you paragraphs of emails. You had support in this journey. And then lastly, I think is really interesting is I don't trust, faith. Like it sounds like you were like an open, you had open hands during the process. Like you were like, you didn't try and game the assessment. You didn't try and, you were just like open and willing to let it happen. Hey, can you want to speak to that? Like where does that come from? Because that's not common. We're usually taking control at some point.
Yeah, I've always had a pretty strong faith, but I've also been someone who goes with the flow pretty easily.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of people in my life and our lives, our family, who are very smart, capable, competent people from different fields. And I think when groups of people get together, there tend to be a lot of too many cooks spoil the soup. There's a lot of cooks, a lot of chefs, and sometimes it's okay just to go with the flow and not necessarily be looking to provide your input. That's not what's always needed from me whenever I go into a room. So I think that played a really big role. And, I believe in prayer, and I believe prayers are answered. And I left a lot of it up to God. I was just going to be faithful and listen and follow and not argue. And that has, there's a lot of stories in the book of that serving people well. And I was hopeful that it would serve me well, and it has.
Very cool. All right. So like I said, there's someone out there listening to this, and he wants to be a teacher, wanted to do it, scared to pull the trigger, whatever. What advice would you give them that would encourage him or give him hope that he can do it?
Well, I guess my first piece of advice would be consider the substitute teacher pool, because that served me well, and that'll either tell you you're on the right path or the wrong path, and reach out to teachers. There's a lot of teachers leaving the workforce for numerous reasons, but there's a whole lot getting in and staying in. And I decided years ago retirement's not necessarily a good thing. I knew too many successful people. They would retire, and all too often one of two things would happen. They would die within a few years.
Yeah.
If they didn't get busy doing something that gave them a sense of purpose. And others would find that sense of purpose and go do something else, and they would have a happy second career or, semi-retirement.
Yeah.
And for the person who's considering teaching, I really think this can be that. I know so many good teachers who teach into their 70s and beyond. I've heard so many wonderful stories of teachers who stay after it, and it can be for a number of reasons. One of which is that they love it; they feel like they're making a difference, and and what more can you ask from a job or an occupation than that?
Yeah. So if you're on the fence, just remember you can do it for a long time and you're going to live 7 to 8 years longer. So
Just take
make
care of
sure
your
you
body.
really like it though before you do it. That
Yeah.
would be the substitute thing. So awesome. Well, Shannon, thank you so much for your time, for your story. I commend you for your courage to take that leap. And you're a great example to a lot of people. There are a lot of people like Matt who are jealous because of what you've done. And I can't wait for him to listen to this.
Yeah, no, I love what you're doing. Thanks for inviting me, and I love the made to matter. I think we are all made to matter, and I love that you're helping people figure out ways to do that and reinvent themselves.
Yeah, thanks so much. All right. Well, Shannon just teed it up. You can visit madetomatter.coach, madetomatter.coach to get a newsletter. Also, my book, The Life That Matters Manifesto, is on my website, as well as you can subscribe to this podcast. So thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, Adam Landrum, guest Shannon Harvey. Thank you. Thanks, Shannon.